I have the distinct honor to introduce you to Wizipan Little Elk. Wizipan is a Rosebud Sioux tribe member and a nationally recognized young Native leader. His work in politics has resulted in record-breaking levels of Native American voter turnout. He worked on various campaigns for Barack Obama, becoming a deputy chief of staff in the U.S. Department of the Interior. In 2011, Wizipan became CEO of the Rosebud Economic Development Corporation. His keynote address today is entitled 7 Generations. We will have a Q&A session at the end of Wizipan's address. Please add your questions in the chat, and Nancy Coulter-Parker, our Director of Content and Insights, will moderate at the conclusion of Wizipan's talk. Welcome, Wizipan.
I am unmuted, and can everyone see the screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Great. How me takepe iuha chante washte na pe chuzapelo. We zipra emachapelona si charu la kota hemacha na la kota na washke gluipi tioshpai emataha. My name is Wizipan Little Elk. I am from a citizen of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, or as we call ourselves, Sichagu, which means burnt thigh. And within our tribe, I come from the we wrap our hairband, which is a specific kind of subunit of our tribe. Gotta say this right off the bat, I made a personal commitment this New Year's that anytime there was a native land acknowledgement, that I would ask everybody who heard the land acknowledgement to donate at least $1 to a native organization. That we cannot, under no circumstances, just do a land acknowledgement and have no follow-up. So that's a personal commitment I've made this year. I'm going to try it out, see how it works, see if we can get a little bit of action flowing behind our words. I want to first of all just express my deep gratitude for being a part of today's conference and for being able to share some words. And also deep gratitude for the organizers. I've organized events, and I know how hard and difficult that can be, working with crazy speakers like me in coordination. So I have a deep appreciation for all of your work. Let's see, where's my, I'm trying to get to the next slide, and it's just not working here.
Can you use your arrow keys?
Yeah, I'm trying to, there we go. Is that working? There we go. So today we're talking about regenerative, and what does regenerative mean? And I would say, from our perspective, that regenerative is indigenous. That what we're talking about is simply the idea that if something is regenerative, that it can come back, that it can reform, that it can be reborn. And when it does, it's going to come back stronger and more resilient than it was before. And I think that when we're looking at examples of what is regenerative, I think that indigenous peoples are one of the kind of best living examples of what that means. And I want to also, ground this in the idea that, we're living organisms, sons and daughters of Mother Earth, and that she herself has gone through many forms of regeneration in her 4.5 billion year lifespan. And that, we've experienced big changes over the course of her time and existence. And that this idea of regeneration is simply a continuation of that overall life cycle. It's particularly important as we face humanity's two greatest existential crises. And from our perspective, I think that is socioeconomic inequity and climate change. And both of those are inextricably tied to one another. And that, if we just, to solve one, we have to solve the other. And that is just, fundamental to solving these two problems, these crises that our species is facing. I want to start with two stories here. One is deeply personal. And in the life of a Lakota, my tribe, and particularly for a male, the killing of a buffalo is one of the biggest events that we can partake in and participate in. And when I killed my first buffalo, it was very meaningful to me and hugely important. And I remember afterwards, I turned to one of my friends and said, I'm finally a Lakota man. I'm finally able to be who I was meant to be by doing this. And it's grounded in our identity. A couple weeks after that event, I had a dream, and I would consider that to be a spiritual dream, in which I killed this huge, magnificent buffalo bull, and my mother and I began to start to butcher it. And right before we started butchering it, it got up and it kind of pawed the ground and looked around and then ran off. And that is what I would call the epitome of regeneration. The idea that we can come back from death, the idea that we can come back from the brink of extinction and come back stronger. And I believe in my whole heart that a part of that power was shared with me through that experience. The idea of regeneration is also something that's deeply rooted in many indigenous cultures. And for us as Sicangu Lakota, it is actually based in prophecy. And we had one of our, in the late 1800s, a leader from our tribe went up into the Black Hills of South Dakota. And he went on, what in English many people would refer to as a vision quest. And he had a vision. And in his vision, he saw 7 elk. The first elk was large. The second elk was smaller. And each one of the elk became smaller and smaller until he saw the 7th elk, which was the largest of all of the 7. And so for us, our idea of regeneration and this idea of what we call our 7-gen philosophy, this idea of thinking and acting and moving for the best interests of 7 generations out, is just a part of our complete livelihood. And for us, regeneration is an inevitability. It's not something that we're going to talk about and maybe do. It is something that has been foretold and it's inevitable. For our tribe, that's a unique vision specific to us. It also is based in our Rosebud Sioux Tribe government constitution. We have a constitutional duty to consider the impact of 7 generations on our decisions. And when we try to break it down, when we think of regenerative, when I think of 7-gen, they're the same thing. And for me, what that means, 3 things. 1, we must act in the best interest of our great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren. We have to think about them, and any decision that we make must be in their best interest. 2nd, all of our decisions must be rooted in morals and ethics. We have to do what's right even when it's difficult. And then finally, we have to utilize and embrace complex systems thinking. If we do, as a human society, all 3 of those things, if we approach the world in that way, it is going to lead to not only this kind of idea of regenerative, but it will actually lead to regenerative thinking. To be able to think regenerative, to be able to think in the way of, again, what we would call 7-gen from our perspective. And it will lead you to ideas and conclusions and insights that you would not have otherwise. And it will lead you to question everything and to question all systems. So for example, when we think about economy and what does a regenerative economy mean? What that actually means is that, our standard systems of defining wealth have to be completely rethought. and that we need to think about and redefine wealth, poverty, money, all of these systems. We have to completely begin to rethink them. And that's what 7Gen will do for you. Our work, and again, how we approach all of this is from that broad 7Gen framework. At the same time, our work is very unique to how we do things in our thought and philosophy. And our interpretation of kind of that 7Gen thinking and philosophy is rooted in how we think of ourselves and organize our society traditionally. And, you know, when we think about, okay, well, 7Gen is nice to think about, but what are we actually trying to do? How do we act in the best interests of our great-grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and how do we incorporate systems thinking into our work? We turn to our own traditions. And for us, at its most basic level, what we're trying to do is to help people become self-actualized. Those people come together and they form healthy families. Healthy families are going to provide vibrant communities, and vibrant communities are going to form sovereign native nations who are then going to reform the Great Sioux Nation. Fairly simple, and we can get more complicated in thinking and talking about that, but that's basically how we implement this idea of 7Gen and regenerative. It also means that as a part of that we create ecosystems. And to be regenerative and to think regenerative means we have to go back to our mother, our grandmother Earth. And she is one of the most complex, intricate, most advanced systems in the entire universe. And the systems that humans develop won't even ever come close to mimicking her, but we can at least try. And so, in order to implement our work, what we've done is we've created an ecosystem and what we call an ecosystem approach, where we combine business, which is led by one of our entities, Redco, where we combine financial assets and skills, led by our CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, where we combine a traditional nonprofit that engages in community development, and where we combine it with policy and data research. And together, looking at all four of those areas, we're able to do our work. And one of the things I always talk about is it's not good enough to just provide a job, or to provide a good place, a place of employment that has great benefits and a great organizational culture. We have to do more, especially in communities of persistent poverty like mine, where I live and work and where I'm from. And so we have to begin changing those very systems that have created those problems in the first place. We have to again, look at home ownership and saving and entrepreneurship and asset building. We have to change our food systems, our housing systems, our education systems, and our healthcare systems. And of course, we do all of this through, informed data to help move policy that is going to support the entire ecosystem. And all of those systems have to work on multiple levels. And, we have to be able to look at the explicit, implicit, and semi-implicit systems upon which all of those systems work. And if we're able to accomplish 1/10 of what we're trying to accomplish, I think we're going to have amazing results. And I think we are having amazing results in our community. And again, that is the goal, and what we're working towards is to mimic and create systems that are going to bring forth life and bring forth prosperity, not only for us as people, but for the world around us. Within that, we have also identified some larger systems that we want to address and that are incredibly important to our work around agriculture, renewable energy, finance, and technology. And one thing I've forgotten to mention is that when we talk about 7Gen and what it actually looks like for us, what that actually means is that we are developing, and we've developed components of a 175-year plan of prosperity for our community and for our region. And so when we think about this idea of regenerative and what it means, we're thinking 175 years out. And we're asking ourselves a bunch of kind of some simple questions. Where are we going to live? Are we going to have clean water? What will our housing systems look like? What will our education systems look like, et cetera? And, what is our relationship with technology going to be? And so we're looking at all of that and just saying some simple goals. We dial that back to one generation, 25 years, dial that back to 10, 5, 3, and 1 year goals. And so that informs our ecosystem of work for a year, so that we're not just, thinking even one generation, we're thinking 7 generations. Because if we're going to pull ourselves out of where we're at, if we're going to solve some of these big problems that are facing the world, we have to think big like this. So what is it actually, those are all nice words and everything that I've talked about is, might sound good, but what does it actually look like in action? And, one of our projects is what we call our Wola Kota Regenerative Buffalo Range, which is a 28,000 acre buffalo ranch. It's in the build-up process right now. That'll eventually be home over the next 5 years to 1,500 buffalo, and it will represent the world's largest Native American owned and managed buffalo herd in the world. And, we've launched this project using those 7-gen ideas and those 7-gen principles. Buffalo is something that, and the return of buffalo is something that we're deeply committed to. It's for our future generations. We have a moral and ethical duty to do this, and that gets translated into the humane way that we're raising the animals, in which we'll also be harvesting them. And it has a systems-based approach, and we've incorporated that systems-based approach into the way that we've imagined the financing and the way that we measure success. We've heard, people talk about ESG, social impact investing, socially responsible investing, et cetera. We've incorporated that framework, and we've, measured 4 bottom lines. Economic, it has to be economically successful or sustainable. It has to be able to support itself. We have developed a number of social kind of metrics that we've incorporated into this, or we are incorporating. The environmental impacts are going to be tremendous for this. And it also has a very deep and strong social justice component. And so it begins to operate and benefit multiple systems in this. And so this is just one project that is going to develop our land, that is going to heal our land, that is going to provide food and protein, that is going to provide opportunities for us to continue our spiritual and cultural traditions. And this is just one of many projects that we either have in development or that we're moving towards, growing and developing. I want to spend the remainder of my time just talking about, our path forward and how we've done this. I call the Buffalo Project our first crack at doing an authentic 7-gen project. And it was 2 years ago that I had a friend tell me about social impact investing. It was a year ago that we said we wanted to be one of the first generations of social impact investing in Indian country. And it's been over the course of a year and a half or so that we said, well, let's do an authentic 7-gen project. And again, this idea, this 7-generation thinking, for us, that is regenerative thinking. And we've learned a lot of lessons, and I want to, for each one of these lessons learned, I want to, have a call to action, for folks. The first lesson is talk is cheap. Everyone talks, especially now in the last year and a half, we're throwing out words like equity, social justice. We're throwing out words like diversity. Those are nice words, But if all we're doing is talking about that, that doesn't do anything. It means nothing, and it just becomes empty promises. I think what's more important than talking about those subjects is to utilize our physiology. And we were born with 2 years and 1 month. My uncle is always telling me, listen twice, speak once. Listen twice, speak once. And what that means is when we're talking about communities of color, when we're talking about historically disadvantaged communities, we must and we need to listen to those communities and provide them a platform and amplify their voices. That's the first thing we have to do. Second, and this really, second is this idea of, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And, that is something that, we've just finished, day 2 of Deb Haaland's historic nomination to be the Assistant Secretary for Interior. And that's one of her quotes. That's something that she believes in. And I think that time and time again, Indigenous people have we go somewhere and we find out we're on the menu. We're being talked about. Decisions are being made without our input. And how do we solve that? And there's an organizer, a friend of mine, who said, you know what, if you don't have a seat, get a folding chair and put yourself at the table. And I think that this is incredibly important, so that when we have conversations around food, around regeneration, around social impact investing, et cetera, we need to find ways to find and help Indigenous people get a seat at that table, because we've been doing this for a long time. Third is when I was thinking about this, I thought about, what does it actually take to do this work? And, when I was a little boy, I got a chance to meet a guy by the name of Jyotibai. And he was a little boy in Gandhi's village. And he talked firsthand about his experience with Gandhi. And I thought about the march, the Salt March, and the way in which all of those people lined up and put their bodies on the line and just got beat to heck, literally beat to heck. Doing this work is difficult. Doing this work is hard. And right now we're not called to put our bodies on the line, but we got to put our feelings on the line. We got to put our egos on the line, and we got to do something. And the call to action on that is at a minimum, we have to be able to put our money forward. And, time and time again, when I talk about this work, one of the things that people say to me is, well, we're looking for above market returns, or we're looking for market returns. And I'm like, no, this stuff is expensive. This stuff is hard. We're talking about, a century and a half of addressing systems of inequity. If we want to be regenerative, this is hard work, and we got to put our money on the table for this. Another kind of lesson that I've learned comes from a friend who said, when you go to a hotel, you go to the front desk clerk to check in, or do you check in with the bellhop? And I think that all too often, Indigenous people and the communities that we serve, we get referred to the bellhop. We don't get referred to the decision makers. And again, this is that idea of, having a seat at the table. And so we need our allies, and we need people to help us, get to that front desk clerk so that we can, check in with the right people. Additionally, my time in this work is I've seen a lot of navel gazing. And, people get caught up in the details, they get caught up in their own ideas instead of being able to do what I call as eagle vision. And eagles are able to see both a football field and a mouse within the football field. And they're able to see the details and the larger landscape. And so we need to be able to both say, hey, we need to create regenerative economic systems. Now let's drill in and see how we can do that at a very on the ground, place-based, minute level, and to be able to pull back out and to be able to have that back and forth and to really embrace that kind of thinking and vision. And then finally, what I say is don't F it up. That when things get difficult, when things get hard, humans, we have a tendency to either freeze, we either fight, or we flee. That is what ends up happening. And we need to be able to draw strength from ourselves, from the systems around us, from our peers, from others, and to say, you know what, we need to accelerate this change right now. And when we talk about accelerators, we're talking about three things. Accelerators are either just loads of money in cash, where you just spend your way out of a problem. Accelerators are people who are incredibly connected and knowledgeable, who can help accelerate the work. Or accelerators can be organizations that provide technical assistance and use their platform to amplify and connect people who are doing the work. I think that if we're able to do all of these things, then we are able to not only talk about being regenerative, but actually be regenerative. And I had an uncle, and he was a singer, a ceremony singer. And he said, and my mother asked him, why don't you record all these songs, these ceremonial songs, so that future generations can have them? And he said, these songs don't belong to me. He said, these songs belong to our ancestors and to the spirits. And he said, some of those songs are going to die with me, but if the future generations are meant to have them, the spirits will bring them back, and somebody's going to have a vision about those songs. And so that's essentially the work that we're doing, is to, not only regenerate our culture and our people, but to also begin to regenerate, an entire earth and ecosystem. And so I'll stop talking now. I've talked long enough, but again, those are some thoughts in terms of place-based regenerative work happening here within an indigenous community here in Rosebud, South Dakota.
Thank you, Wizipan. Really appreciate you sharing that with us. And I also appreciate your family sharing you with us this morning. I know you have some little ones around there in the backdrop. So one of the questions we had, and you mentioned Deb Hallen's nomination, and someone was asking, with her nomination, what would you like her top 3 areas of focus to be?
Regenerative ag is both from a farming and from a buffalo standpoint, I think would be incredible. I think we also, using the systems that we have in place around specifically around government procurement, I think could be incredibly strong and helpful and meaningful. And then also I think that around land management, the Bureau, there's 55 million acres of federal trust land in the United States. And if we're going to talk about, good land management, if we're going to talk about regenerative agriculture, then we need to be testing and monitoring and set up a system to, kind of evaluate the health of that land, and then to set up goals that we can measure against, based and utilize best land management practices. Those would be 3.
Okay. And what's the best way for an outside entity then to approach, say, and work with, say, your company or with tribal companies? What would you like to see happen or recommend? I know you sort of touched on this, but just, more.
So I think that one is the idea of acceleration. So if you're a company or an entity, what do you do and what do you do best? And how can you offer? I don't think that so for example, during National Bison Month, we got contacted by a company in Colorado. I think that they sell flowers. And they were like, you know what? We're going to donate a small percentage of our revenue this month to support your buffalo herd. And they just heard about it, thought the shaggy animals are awesome, and wanted to help and support. If you're a media company, how can you uplift and amplify indigenous voices? If if you're a doctor or a dentist, is there a way to volunteer with organizations? We've seen that. So I think it's taking what you do best and what your skill set is, and then finding a way to plug in. And again, amplification of other Indigenous voices takes nothing, virtually nothing.
And then on that note, are there some, I think you spoke with me about a project that you were working on, and I believe you mentioned, I think there was a barrier possibly of employment, or just, sort of structuring some of the projects. Are there issues or barriers that that you run into in trying to develop business, or, take on projects?
So some of the biggest barriers, I think probably the biggest is, persistent poverty. And, there's incredible social impacts that it has on local communities. It also makes it incredibly hard, incredibly difficult for networking, to get outside of our community. There's incredible kind of stigmas and kind of viewpoints about our work and our communities, and those have to be broken down sometimes. But I think that's probably the biggest barrier. And what that does is it makes human development, and I hate the word human capital, but that's what people use, the word people use. So while we have high unemployment, we have lower levels of folks that are employable. And massive investments in terms of on the education side are desperately needed, because we could create 1,000 jobs, but our people, do they have the skill sets to be able to do those jobs? And when I talk skill sets, I'm talking from a holistic perspective. I'm not talking certifications, which is a thing, but really our approach to this kind of development starts with social and emotional health, which just kind of allows one to do work and to open the door and to do it in a positive way, followed by essential skills, followed by technical skills, and then capped off with kind of training and help and assistance in historical trauma. And kind of learning about epigenetics and how do we address these historical traumas that are really holding a lot of us back. So again, when we talk about human development, human capital development, we're talking about it from a very holistic perspective.
So on that, how can the wisdom of planning for 7 generations, how can that be moved into sort of mainstream consideration for how we live and co-create, or how, what are some thoughts about how maybe a broader adoption or thinking around that?
So I really think just following, kind of that set of questions that I outlined in any and all decisions. As the United States was addressing World War II, what would have happened if they said, are we acting in the best interest of our great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren? Would they have come to the same decisions? Would they have dropped a nuclear bomb? Maybe, I don't know. But in any decision point that we as individuals, families, communities, corporations take, I think that's a critical question. The second question is it moral and ethical? Are we making a decision that adheres to our values? Is it brave? Are we being generous? Kind of just those real basic human values. And, what does that lead to? And then third, are we looking at the big system? Are we making a decision in a vacuum? When we think about plowing up a bunch of ground, that's going to have negative impacts on the ecosystem, on topsoil, et cetera. What are the social implications of a phone app? Is that good? Is it bad? How is it playing, socially, psychologically, etc. And I think that if we just answer those three questions and are intentional about them, I think it's going to really lead us to some different conclusions for our society.
And when you mentioned World War II, I think, would we use pesticides, right? Like that's all those decisions that we've made along the way. I think so. I guess finally, I just want to ask you what organizations you mentioned in the beginning, that the acknowledgement, but the acknowledging with, backing that. What organizations can we support with our dollars, to support First Nations? What would you recommend? And is that just, your organization? I think someone put a link up, or just is there?
For sure. For sure. So I always recommend organizations that I support with my own money, for my own personal bank account. So when we're talking about land, I always I have recurring donations to landback.org. Or hey, we're just literally buying stolen land back. That's what we're doing. No one's going to give it to us, so we have to just buy it back. I strongly support the American Indian College Fund. They do some great work. I also support NARF, Native American Rights Fund, which is critical and important to kind of the overall defense of legal Native American legal rights. Four Directions is a voting rights organization that I work with and strongly support. And then, of course, Sichungu CDC is our own organization, or else rosebudbuffalo.org. Those are, the supporting the work here. But I give money to all of those.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Really appreciated this. And I think some of those, if you maybe other questions in the chat that I may have missed, so please take a look at that as well.
For sure. Yeah, I can kind of scroll through those. I saw one of the questions is a barrier to financing. Depending on the project, right? Some projects are going to be more profitable than others. For those that are going to be on the more standard side, we put together business plans, proposals. Everything is done through feasibility studies, etc. We can go to a bank. We can use the Bureau of Indian Affairs loan guarantee program, which is fairly easy to work with, and it'll guarantee up to 80% of the loan. The issue is, how do we come up with 20% equity? And that is one of the biggest challenges we face, especially in a community like ours, where I got a $10 million kind of housing and commercial development that we're working on right now. How do I come up with $2 million to reach my 20% equity? Which means I have to rely upon assets, which we don't necessarily have, or bridge financing. And I think that the bridge financing is an area that is where I'm really going to be focusing over the next several years, is looking at kind of the social impact investment framework. Looking at CDFIs to be able to, go get some of that bridge financing. So that's probably the biggest challenge we have from a financing perspective, is coming up with that equity.